It's a real pleasure to be on the webinar with you today.
It's awesome. We're so happy to have you here.
Yeah. Welcome to everybody who's listening in today. Hopefully this is going to be an hour well spent. I think it will be. We're really going to focus on both sort of the big picture of digital transformation. What are some of the things you need to keep in mind, and the capacities that you need to think about adding to your team or to your work, and also then get very specific in terms of what are some things that you can do literally today to get you on that right path to digital transformation. The title of the webinar is Making Digital Transformation Affordable and Doable. That is not to say that it doesn't still take time. Things done well often do take time. So none of this, no transformation happens overnight. So this is no different. So again, yeah, hopefully this will be the right mix of both sort of practical steps and also sort of big picture thinking about how you can make digital tools and processes work for you. So first, just a little bit about me. That's me in the photo. Yeah, I don't look as glamorous on the other side of the screen today. I'm working from home, so I'm putting my headshot face forward rather than my working at home face forward. So I'm not a technologist by any means, which hopefully should make you feel good about your capacity if you're not a technologist to lead digital transformation. I learned digital skills on the job. I was managing a small nonprofit with programming in 17 cities across Canada and relying on 30 different funder relationships and 150 different volunteers. So a lot of complexity, and we were an event-based organization called Framework, running a program called the Time Raiser. Some of you might have heard of it. So the only way that we could make that work with just 6 staff was to get very good at managing information and creating well-designed processes to be able to make it all kind of work. My background is in academia, so in doing my doctorate, I definitely learned about how to manage large pieces of information, large data sets. So that was, when I say data sets, I don't mean necessarily always big spreadsheets, but just thinking about putting shape and order on information. So that was helpful. And then, so with that experience of running that organization and relying on good digital skills to make it all come together, I realized that there was a real need in the sector at large to think through how we can use digital tools to make our lives easier and to make our impact clearer. So we actually developed a program that was really directed towards building the digital skills capacity of the nonprofit sector. And from there, I've gone on to work with the Good Partnership, focusing both on our systems, but also on working with clients to improve their systems. So we do solutions comparison, we do provisioning and integrations, impact reporting, and database implementation. We also, just a little plug for those of you listening and wanting to know more, we do offer 30-minute free phone consultations if you have really specific questions about your systems and how you can improve them. So do take advantage of that. If you go to thegoodpartnership.com, you will find some information about that. Getting into the meat of it. We create an enormous amount of data every day. This is probably not a surprise to those of you listening. So by 2020, there'll be 200 billion devices connected to the internet. So that's just by next year. We're creating 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every single day. So massive amounts of data being produced by everything that we do, everything from taking a photo to sending an email. All of that contributes to this quintillion bytes. I can't even visualize or conceptualize a quintillion of anything, but my instinct says it's a lot. So, sorry, let me just go to the next slide. So we often hear about big data, right, and big data analysis, and how important that is to economies and to governments. So you probably, working for a nonprofit organization, and many of you, I would imagine, just statistically are working in a small nonprofit, which characterizes the majority of the nonprofit sector in Canada, small organizations. So you probably don't create any huge massive data sets, but you're creating a lot of small data, and that data is very powerful, and it can also be very overwhelming. So some of the examples of that small data are your donor data. So donor data consists of a number of different categories: names, addresses, emails, phone numbers, the amounts of donations, designations, tributes, donation types. I'm sure you can think of, whether they're recurring or one time. I'm sure you can think of a number of different types of donor data. Same with volunteer data. Also financial data. You're probably creating program impact data, also marketing data. So these are not necessarily massive data sets. I mean, for some of you working for larger organizations, they may be, but they're not necessarily huge data sets, but nonetheless, when they start to multiply over several years, that starts to become overwhelming. And not only that, when you're not able to sort of cross-reference two data points against each other, you're missing out on some valuable insight. So for example, you might want to know, based on a donor, their place of work. That might be something that you collect when you ask for a donation. You might then also want to know whether or not that place of work does, either employ volunteer grants. And if you can't sort of cross-reference those two data points against each other, you're maybe losing a potential to ask, either a volunteer or a donor to help leverage their company's generosity for your good, right? So there's importance in thinking how you can get that data and organize it in your organization so that it can work for you. And this is all part of the thinking that has to go into digital transformation, or perhaps even the impetus for why you might seek out digital transformation. You probably know instinctively that there's more that you can do with the small data. The question is, how do you do it? So this is a very well-known sort of pyramid that forms some part of systems thinking. Data is the base of the period, so that's, our quintillion bytes of data down here. Data gets turned into information. Information, when analyzed, becomes knowledge, and when we accumulate knowledge, we gain wisdom. So, all of that to say that, the data tends to be quite unstructured information. Quite unstructured generally. When we apply analytical tools, we turn it into information, okay? And that's where the heart of your digital transformation work will likely be focused, is how do you turn that data into information that can then be analyzed and then generate knowledge about how best to maximize your programs, your efficiency internally, and all of this ultimately drives your mission. So the way that data becomes information tends to be through machines. There used to be a time where we didn't have machines to process large amounts of data and to turn it into information. But now, we definitely live in a machine-driven age. So the thing about machines, though, is that they're quite stupid. They're getting smarter. That's a whole other conversation about AI. But even AI needs to learn, right? And requires humans to tell it how to learn, right? So machines need human input to tell them how to understand and organize that data, right? So what you see here in this little GIF is the example of probably a computer that was the size of your bedroom, turning this binary code into a number that a human would understand. We don't necessarily understand the binary code, but we definitely understand the number that it produces. So again, a lot of your effort towards digital transformation is thinking through how you tell the machine how to understand and organize your data. So that machine, thinking in very broad terms, you can even think of that machine as an Excel sheet. An Excel sheet is a type of a machine that turns data into information based on how you apply either filters or formulas to turn that data into information. So you're already doing this on a small scale. Digital transformation is just that process writ large. Okay, so when you're applying that human input to data, you're turning it into usable information, as we can see here in the GIF. It's applying a frequency formula and helping the person understand how many test scores can be attributed to each of those score bands, right? Okay. So, all of this to say is that the digital transformation is not just about technical know-how, but it is definitely about this, but it's not just about that. If in thinking about your digital transformation, you're just like, okay, well, I just need like a computer scientist, or I need an IT volunteer to come in and help. It's not going to be enough. That digital transformation, which is to say, the process of telling the machine how to turn the data into information, requires 3 very different kind of profiles of knowledge. So one is technical knowledge, for sure. There's no getting around it. Like if you want to be running an effective digital, if you want to be running an organization that takes advantage of digital tools, there is some kind of technical know-how that either you'll have to acquire, or you'll have to hire for, or you can outsource for. There's a number of ways to gain that in your organization, which is not to say that that you need to have people who know how to code, right? Like on the the range of what constitutes technical knowledge, there's a small part of the population in Canada knows how to code and can like write and build things from scratch. A huge part of the population knows how to use things like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and then there's all of this sort of middle knowledge, which is tools like your database and your email marketing tool and interactive forms, and these all none of these require a computer science background, but they do understand some of these basic principles about how information moves between systems, which we'll get into later. So that technical knowledge is important, but also so is your business, your mission, your clarity and focus on those things, right? And many of you being leaders in your organization probably have that locked down. Some of you, if you don't have that mission clarity and focus in terms of how your programs are contributing to your mission, before you do anything around digital transformation, get clear on that piece. The third thing that you need to rely on are design principles. So the first two may seem obvious, right? But design is actually very critical for getting the most out of your digital transformation efforts. As we know, that great design is rooted in empathy. So as leaders in the charitable space, we have a lot of empathy. So though you might not consider yourself a designer, you have some of the building blocks that can contribute to really great design principles applied to digital transformation. Just a little bit further on these points, right? So here we have our technology skills. Over here we have our business or mission related skills, and here we have our design skills, and all of these converge in the role of a UX designer or a user experience designer. Now, most of us don't work in organizations that are big enough to have UXs, but you can start to sort of to think like a UX designer. You know, some of the companies that apply UX designers are where you might see design applied to technology, and you might not think of it. You know, in Instagram, right? I don't know if any of you noticed recently they made a decision to hide the number of likes that a post receives. So you see the photo, but you can't see how many likes it has. You used to be able to. So this is actually designed as a decision that's driven by empathy for the user, knowing that people, there was anxiety created with you know, people wanting to gain more likes for posts, and so they found that if they took away that sort of visibility, then that they actually could potentially lower the anxiety of the Instagram user, right? So design decision driven by empathy that affected the digital, that affected in some ways the way that we interact with the platform, right? So you can see how that's a combination of all of these elements of the technological piece, right? You know, how do we change that view of the business piece? How do we continue to get people to use our platform? And then the design piece, right? What does it look like then if we can't see how many people like a post? Again, Airbnb. I don't know if any of you have noticed, if you book an Airbnb, then the address of the place magically shows up on your Google Maps, right? So this is, again, a design consideration rooted in the understanding and the needs of the traveler, right? If you're a traveler, you've booked an Airbnb, the chances are that you're not in a city that's familiar to you. You're probably going to be using the maps on your phone to navigate. So having that location already added to the map will help orient you. Again, this is a decision that's rooted in understanding and being empathetic to the needs of the people who are using the platform. So similarly, as you think about either digitizing part of your programming, or you're thinking about digitizing some of your operations, you really want to start thinking about the kinds of people who are going to be using the technology. It's as critical as the technological skills and the business and mission clarity, okay? So as we said, you know, most of us can't afford to hire a UX designer who's dedicated to this thinking. I know the good partnership, we certainly can't, but we've definitely learned to think a little bit like a UX designer. And here are some of these 5 principles that you can keep in mind as you think about digital transformation. Sorry, if you hear me pausing, it's because I'm drinking water. Okay, so we'll go into each of these, but just sort of at a high level. These are the 5 principles. Open architecture is best. You aim for one version of the truth. You share by default. You create information once, and you design with the end in mind. Okay, so what the heck am I talking about here? So designing with the end in mind is critical. So this is, again, part of the, in some cases, this is connected to the empathy piece. So, you know, what will you do with the information that you're gathering? So like, think of the ultimate use and work backwards. For example, you want volunteers for sign up for shifts and then show up on time. So you work backwards from that need to arrive at the best way to gather and share that information with those volunteers, right? So always think about the endpoint. So if the endpoint, again, is that your board members have the information that they need in a timely way to be prepared for their meetings. Okay, so if that's what I need to get to, what are the elements that I need to put in place so that they can have access to that information in a timely way, and that's not all manually driven by me and my team, right? So open architecture. This might be a new term for some of you. So open architecture is a modular approach to building out your IT stack or your technology tools that you use. So it's kind of like your smartphone. So with your phone, you can customize your phone to your interests and budget and storage space and data plan, etc., by adding apps, right? So as a small nonprofit tech infrastructure can also be modular. So you don't necessarily have to buy into one tool that does everything. In fact, they don't necessarily exist that way. Rather, the better way to think about putting together your technology infrastructure is to invest in multiple tools like your apps that allow you to add or subtract applications or tools depending on your needs, right? So, you know, the one size, you know, the one tool fits all purposes is it's a bit of a unicorn. Rather, multiple tools put together in the right way can actually go a lot further for you. They can scale with you, and they're often more affordable than the idea of paying for one tool that purports to do anything. The other caution I would say is, you know, if anyone suggests that they're going to build something for you from scratch, you know, oh, we can just like build this web page that'll connect to your database, and then we'll also build this email tool. Like, that's a big red flag. There's no need to build anything from scratch or custom these days. There are so many tools on the market that are built with, you know, the non-technical user in mind, and that's where you want to be. You want to be using those kinds of tools that you can have control over. So a key part of open architecture is interoperability, which is to say the way that those tools work with each other. There's no point in adopting an open architecture approach if those tools don't connect, right? So think of them as puzzle pieces. You know, all the puzzle pieces in a box are designed to connect with each other. But you can't take one puzzle piece from another puzzle and expect that you're going to find its match in a different puzzle, right? So interoperability is something very key. And again, we're going to come back to that in a little bit more detail. So the way that interoperability is achieved is by an API. So an API is an application programming interface. I can feel some of your eyes glazing over right now. Sounds like it's becoming very, very technical. It's really not very technical. An API is simply something that allows information to go back and forth between software tools or modules. So for example, the example of Airbnb, you know, adding the address of your rental unit to Google Maps, that's achieved through APIs. So the API that Google provides for their maps is open, so that the software developers at Airbnb can say, okay, we understand how to plug our address information into Google Maps, right? So again, think of them as two pieces of the puzzle. Airbnb knows that their piece of the puzzle, which is the address to the unit, fits into the space left open by the open API in Google Maps, okay? You can also think of an API like a waiter bringing orders and food between the kitchen and the diners, right? An API is the waiter who takes that order, those words on a menu, brings them to the kitchen, and it gets turned into a meal, and then brings it back to the table where it's consumed, right? So the API simply brings information, allows information to flow back and forth. Okay. So the second principle, or third principle rather, one version of the truth. So part of your digital transformation will be to liberate you from this right-click save as syndrome. How many of you have a situation like this, right? Version 2, final, version final, version new final, right? So this often leads to a lot of confusion as to which version of any document people need to access. So the concept of one version of the truth means defaulting to using collaborative documents wherever possible. So it means, you know, if you have a database, it means adding a link to a document that's hosted in the cloud rather than attaching files. It means link, it means using the collaborative functionality of either Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive to work collaboratively in documents rather than always saving them with as a different version on your computer. Really, really key, especially key when you're talking about budgets as well, right? I'm sure you've had the experience of multiple people working on a budget, and then maybe you or someone else had the responsibility of syncing all of those changes to one final version of that budget document. Not fun, total waste of time, doesn't need to happen in this day and age. So again, tools like Google Docs or Microsoft Office 365 and OneDrive allow you to collaborate in real time. So no one has to attach files. You can always be confident when you use these kinds of tools that you're working on the most up-to-date version of a document. So I can't overemphasize how important that is for your digital transformation. So a fourth principle, share by default. So when you create new information, so a new file, ask yourself, is this information easily available for the rest of the team to access? So the question is, how much of your day or your colleagues' day are spent responding to requests for information. So that information could include contact details, program data, location information, invoices or receipts, funder agreements, logos and image files. It's one of my pet peeves, quite frankly, to receive an email looking for a file or a piece of information, because I know that the principle by which I work is to share by default. I will always put the attachment or whatever file or whatever image file or whatever logo I just received or agreement, I will always by default, as soon as I receive the email, I will by default put it in our shared drive, meaning that it is available to the rest of my team. We enforce this in our office space by some fun things, like we have instead of a swear jar, we have a share jar, right? So if you go looking for a file or a piece of information that should have been shared and you can't find it, the culprit puts a quarter in a jar, sort of thing. Just a fun little way to keep us accountable to the act of being mindful and specific about sharing information that we all need to do our jobs well. Okay, another principle, create information once and put it to work in multiple places. So data entry stinks, it's boring, it takes too much time, and you shouldn't have to be doing too much of it. So whenever possible, think about how your volunteers, parents, donors, kid coaches, that's a specific use case, can do your data entry for you. So that means that you're creating forms or intake tools that connect directly to your database, that connect directly to a spreadsheet, because if you're still asking people to call when they want to sign up for a volunteer opportunity or a program, that means that you're spending time taking down information on a phone and then probably, manually entering it into a system, and then maybe you download that Excel file of program registrants and later upload that file into an email marketing tool, and all of those steps can be avoided by creating forms, again, that your constituents can add their information to, and then further avoided by these principles of interoperability, wherein you can use the APIs that belong to each of those tools to send information between them. So some very essential first steps. So we have a poll, a question around what you are using for your core productivity tools. And I think Marina is going to pop that poll into the chat box. So if you can take a second to answer that.
That's great, Anya. I've just launched it on the screen here, so folks should be able to just click on your screen and vote, and I'll just leave it up there for a second so that everyone gets a chance to participate. Again, it should be showing on your screen, so you can just click whichever, whether it's G Suite, Microsoft 365 cloud-based, server-based Microsoft products, or other. And Anya, do you want me to leave this up for a moment, or do you want me to close it and fill you in on the results?
Let's leave it up for just a couple of seconds. Sorry for that background noise. I realized I have to plug my computer in. There we go. So yeah, so the question is about what your core productivity tool is. So this is I'm really interested to see what these results are. So maybe Marina, we can close it now and see what the results show.
Awesome. Yes. So I'm just sharing this with everyone, so so that all of the attendees can see what the responses are as well. So it looks like we have 17% are using G Suite, 37% Microsoft 365 cloud-based, 32% the server-based Microsoft products, and 13% other. Is that in line with what you were thinking, Anya?
Yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds about right. So, so for those of you, that 17% that are using something other, and for that 30-something% of you that are using Microsoft server-based, you have one job, one task. Switch to the cloud. Switch to either Office 365. You can do so through TechSoup Canada, which will provision an account for you for free. Or if you'd like to instead use the Google suite of products, which are also fantastic. Google for Nonprofits provides, I think it's unlimited users with up to 50 gigs of storage in the drive, for free. Your progress on your digital transformation depends on you making that switch. I'm not here to sort of, promote the interests of two big corporations. It's just a reality of how software is currently being designed for global use, which is to say that most companies and organizations fall into one of these two categories, either either Office 365 or G Suite. And so everything is being designed with those people in mind. And if you're not on either one of those tools, you risk not being able to take advantage of the way that that technology design is progressing. So again, if you're not on either one of those two tools, that's your one takeaway from today. That's your one priority. So that's great.
And Anya, I think I'm going to interrupt there just for a sec, because it looks like we have a frozen poll on our screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull the presenter status off here, and I'm just going to see if I can switch it back to you and see if that makes a difference. Do you mind just picking it up again?
Yeah.
Perfect. There we go. Thank you.
Okay, great. No problem. Okay. So again, that's your key takeaway. Okay. So this is the why do I have to choose? And when I say pick a team, in choosing to deep dive on one or the other system, so whether that's Google or Microsoft. Again, you'll make a decision that clarifies how every other software decision that you make flows. Okay, so really, really critical.
Anya, I'm going to jump in for a second as well, because I had a question come up that I think might be useful for you to address right now. Actually, two questions, just defining some terms that you've used. Number one, Office productivity tool. Maybe you could just say a little bit about that, and then also server-based versus cloud.
Of course, perfect. Thank you for that. So your office productivity tool, so that's the suite of tools that you use on a daily basis to get most of your work done. So that includes your email tool, your document editor, your spreadsheet editor, your presentation tool. So in the Microsoft environment, those would be Outlook, Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, and PowerPoint. In the Google universe, that's Gmail, Google Sheets, Google Docs, and Google Slides. Okay, so that's what I mean when I refer to your core office tool or your core productivity tool. The difference between server-based and cloud-based. So the server-based instance of the Microsoft tools means that you can't access anything that's on that server from the cloud, right? So you likely can't access you can't access shared documents if you're not in the office, right? Because everything would be located on a server unless you have some kind of remote access tool, which is functional but not optimal. So if it's server-based, that means that it's not located in the cloud, rather it's hosted locally. So hosted either by a server that's in your office building or that's offsite, but it's not in the cloud. So I hope that makes sense.
Thank you.
Okay. So if you've chosen or when you've chosen either one of those two tools, go deep with them. Get to know them intimately and make sure that you're working hard to maximize the functionality, because there's so much that each one of those tools or that suite of tools can actually do for you. You likely don't need to stray beyond them until you've understood what they're capable of in and of themselves. It also means, I think I sort of made this note back here. Okay, so in the pick a team and going deep on them, this is a message for those of you who are using, say, Outlook, but then you kind of sneakily use Google Forms every now and then to like build a form. So you're that's what we would call a shadow system, right? When you're kind of moving back and forth between those two platforms, or if you're a Google or Gmail user, but you only build your presentations in PowerPoint. Again, like if you're going back and forth between those tools within those two platforms, you're probably not getting as much out of them as you really could. So again, that's my second central piece of advice is go deep in maximizing the use of those tools. So I wonder, Marina, if we could pop up that second poll that's asking you about the level of sort of optimization you think that you've achieved as an organization with those tools.
Certainly, that's up on the screen now, everybody, so please go ahead and vote there. We have highly optimized, somewhat optimized, not very optimized, and basic. So if you want to just go ahead and click on your screen, which option works best for you.
Yeah, and no value judgments here at all. Like I would say it really is. It's a rare person who like regularly reads all of the feature release notes and really geeks out on how to implement them. But it can be aspirational.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just gonna close this and share it with everyone. So yeah, we have the bulk of the responses are in the somewhat or not very at 40 and 35%. Okay. 22% basic and alone 3% highly optimized.
Right on. Well, good for you all. And maybe you can teach me a couple things, because I don't think I would even like. I am pretty nerdy, but I don't. I feel like there's still more that I can get out of the suite of tools that we're using. So so that's awesome. You know, for those of you who are in that not very and basic, you know, that's my key takeaway for you all is you know, to subscribe to the YouTube channels for each of your tools, to watch some of the tutorials, and spend time getting to know a little bit more about the functionality. So, for example, with advanced formulas, with some named and protected ranges in a spreadsheet, you really can turn any spreadsheet into a lightweight database. You pair this with forms, so both Microsoft and Google have a forms tool, and you've got a pretty powerful intake and data management tool, right? So those forms that you can create in either of those environments link straight to a spreadsheet that can be shared with multiple people. So if you're doing analysis or ratings on people's submissions, you know, their suitability as volunteers or their, you know, survey responses as program participants or applicants, you know, that becomes a very powerful little combination. Then if you add in the data visualization functionality, so Data Studio in the Google environment or Power BI, you can take that same spreadsheet and turn it into a pretty beautiful and powerful dashboard. Again, that can be shared with the right people at the right time, you know, on any internet-enabled device. So, you know, I would say, you know, if you're feeling like, okay, I could get more out of this, you know, invest in a course on how to maximize those tools. For those in the Google environment, I'd recommend Ben L. Collins courses. They're really great. I think it's like $500, and you get sort of lifetime access to a really rich set of learning videos that show you how to build basic dashboards, how to use some advanced formulas to be able to analyze that data, or rather tell the machine how to analyze that data and turn it into information for you. So the other thing that on your path to digital transformation you're going to want to get familiar with is this concept of integration as a service. So this harkens back to our API conversation and the conversation about interoperability. So, you know, many tools don't have what's called a native integration, which is to say that they themselves haven't built anything within their platform to automatically connect the data there with, say, an Excel spreadsheet or a Google sheet. But the great news is that there's now this drive towards integration as a service. So there's tools that are specifically designed to serve as the waiter between, for example, your email marketing tool and your volunteer management tool. So tools such as Zapier, IFTTT, which is if this then that, Workato or Tray.io are all very accessible tools that allow you to create that level of interoperability between your tools that you've chosen. So again, you know, this again relies on APIs. So these tools allow you to take advantage of the open APIs in either the Microsoft or G Suite products, and the same open APIs in a range of tools. So you can see in this GIF here what's happening. This is a Zapier interface. So it relies on a concept called triggers and actions. So the trigger in this case is that someone has signed a document using this tool. I'm not quite sure what it is, some kind of document management tool or contract tool. So signed document, and the action is that document then gets uploaded to Google Drive, right? So instead of somebody emailing you an attachment of a signed document and then you having to upload it to Drive, you can use what are called zaps in the Zapier environment to zap that document when it's signed directly into your Drive. So saving you a huge number of steps. So really, really powerful. I would recommend for those of you already in the Google environment or in Office 365, to check out Zapier and play around. It's really quite user-friendly. As soon as you watch a couple of the how-to videos, you'd be surprised to what kind of magic you can create there. Okay. So before we get into the key takeaways, we talked about affordability as being one of the things that is a key sort of goal of the webinar. So to the point about affordability, again, that G Suite of tools or Office 365 are free for nonprofits. And there is a tremendous amount that you can accomplish with them. So you're not talking about any additional cost in that context. Where you might want to spend some of that budget is in, some occasional support or some learning and training, and then for some subscriptions for additional tools, perhaps an email marketing tool, perhaps in that integration as a service tool, perhaps for a volunteer management tool if you're dealing with sort of complex and a number of different volunteers, or perhaps there's a database that you're using. But I think with this kind of amount, you can get pretty far. I wonder if we can pop up that third poll, Marina, which asks you all to share a little bit about your technology budget.
Definitely.
It's okay if you don't know this question as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, so that's up on the screen now. So that's our last poll for today. So if everyone can just go ahead and take a moment to click on the screen there. And yes, we didn't have an option for, other.
Or don't know.
Or don't know.
Yeah. Apologies for that.
Awesome. Okay, so let me just close and share that. So so we have almost 30% in the 10,000 plus.
Wow.
5 to 10,000, we have 18%, 2,500 to 5,000, we have 15%, 1,000 to 2,500, 18%, under 1,000, 22%. So actually a pretty even split there amongst all of them. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
absolutely. Interested to hear, that 30% are operating, with more than a $10,000 technology budget. And I'd also be, interested in knowing with that budget, how much of that is in a subscription fee or an annual fee on a database. Some of the databases on the market can be very, very expensive. I'm wondering if some of that cost is associated with that. Okay, so just the key takeaways before we get into our question and answer period. So consider business needs, technological skill, and design thinking when you're thinking about your digital transformation. All three are equally important. Pick a side, pick a team, Microsoft or Google. This is the great divide. And go deep on the tools that are provided with either one of those platforms. So whether it's Microsoft or Google, go deep on those tools. Become familiar with this concept of information as a service. Practice those 5 principles of good digital practice. Do it in incremental ways. Start small. Maybe it's just you're going to build one small Zap, or you're going to build a form that's connected to a spreadsheet, and you're going to share that spreadsheet. And get in the habit of practicing and reinforcing these new habits. The thing that we didn't have time to get into today is the habits that you have to foster in adopting new digital ways of working. The way that you have done things might become a little bit different. So practicing makes perfect, really, truly. Investing between $5,000 and $7,500 in your stack for subscriptions, occasional support can get you pretty darn far. So it doesn't have to mean that you're expending a huge amount of resources on this. So that's it from my end. Like to ask if there are some questions out there, what kind of questions you might have. Happy to answer.
Awesome. Thank you, Anya. Yes, we do have some great questions coming in. I'd like to start maybe by addressing security, because we've had a few questions on that. So first of all, cloud versus server. Are there security issues there to think about?
So, of course, there definitely are. And it depends on what kind of data that you as an organization are dealing with. If you are dealing with medical information, highly sensitive details such as that, if you are retaining credit card information, you would do well to consult a security expert as to what will be the implications in moving to the cloud. I'm by no means a security expert, so I couldn't sort of confidently answer that question. Where I can speak to with great confidence is there's often confusion about CRA's position with regard to servers or cloud tools, especially when the server is located outside of Canada, and when you're dealing with donor information. Their position is that as long as you have a copy of that tax receipt located in Canada, which is to say that you have a copy of that tax receipt on a computer that's located in Canada or a printout, then that satisfies the requirements. So that means that you're not limited to only having tax receipts on a server that is based in Canada.
Wonderful. And how does that relate then when we're talking about using third-party solutions as well? Are there security issues to think about in choosing those?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of the things that we look at when we're recommending tools to clients is, we do read those really long contracts and user agreements. So one of the things that you're looking out for is data contingency plans. You're looking out for how long the company has been around. You're looking out for any history of any data breaches. You want to look out for statements about how their encryption process is. Is it end-to-end? So these are some of the considerations that, as you're looking at third-party tools, and reading those user agreements, you look out for those things in particular. When you start to think about, using Google products or Microsoft products, some of the biggest municipalities in the world use cloud-based solutions. Some of the biggest banks in the world use cloud-based solutions. The level of encryption on Google products and on Microsoft products is much greater than any kind of protection that you could offer in comparison with a server. If you'll remember, some of the trouble that the government of Canada got into around a data breach was because somebody walked out of the building with a pen drive, right? So there's really no great argument to say that that by default an offline server is safer than a cloud server.
That's helpful. And just on that note as well, I'll just mention that we have a cybersecurity webinar coming up next Thursday. So if you're concerned about security, that would be a good one to sign on for.
I will be signing in myself. I'm sure there's things I could learn. That sounds cool.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so you mentioned the Microsoft Google divide. Do you have, not to say that you need to recommend one product over the other, but are there some criteria that people should look at when they're deciding between the two?
Definitely, and I think in the article that I just wrote and you just published on CharityVillage there, Marina, there was a link to an article that helps you decide which of the two suite of tools are best suited to you. It comes down to, in some cases, like, doing a little bit of a gut check on your staff, right? If you're familiar with using Excel and you really, Outlook, and you really like that interface, like, you know, don't make life difficult by asking people to learn a whole new interface. You know, that seems like an easy choice. If you have, you know, maybe, I hate to stereotype in this way, but it often does end up kind of being true, that younger people tend to have had more experience using Gmail, like personally. So using it in a work environment feels very familiar, and it's easy for that type of workforce to adapt. So yeah, there's definitely some considerations in choosing between the two, and yeah, I'd ask you to look at that article that was just published last week, because there's a link there to help you decide.
Excellent, and I've put that link in the chat box as well, so people can go ahead and access that too. And so that also brings us to another great question that a few people have asked, and that's about tips for rolling out a project like this with staff that might be a little bit feeling resistant to change, which, you know, let's face it, is often most of us when it comes to these things.
The old change management chestnut. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So maybe you could share a few tips on, I know you mentioned the share jar, which is a great one, but if you have some other tips, that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I would always say that any kind of digital transformation, you should budget between 12 and 18 months for it to really take hold. You know, don't expect that people are going to be familiar and comfortable overnight. You know, think about every time Facebook issues a new update to the interface, people are like, ah, I hate this is the worst thing ever. And then within, you know, a week and a half, they're like, oh, okay, cool, these are neat. So, you know, you're always gonna hit that resistance. I think as much as possible, if you can, you know, to use a very, very trendy word, you know, gamify the process. And you can do that by looking, so each of the tools has a very robust admin panel. So you can see who's uploading files, who's sharing files. And you can create a little bit of a competition, right? So it's like at the end of every week, you know, whoever has been most active in the platform, or who has you know, shared the most documents, or who has been the most you know, committed to ongoing learning, you know, win some kind of a prize. Maybe it's like a lunch or something. So just like to make that process fun, and also, you know, to give people the time to learn. So that often means, you know, like budgeting a couple of hours a week that says, okay, everybody, program work, office work, off the table, not doing it. We're going to, you know, watch these couple of videos together about using this tool, and we're gonna practice a couple of things together as a group. So to make the learning intentional, specific, and fun, I think is the best way to encourage people to try these new ways of working.
That's great. Thank you so much, Anya. I think we're going to hold it there for questions since we are running up on the hour. Did you have any final comments before we sign off?
No, just thanks to all of you for attending today. And again, do feel free to check out our digital assessment. We have a little survey tool on thegoodpartnership.com, and you know, helps you to sort of land on a score in terms of your digital capacity. And then allows you to book a 30-minute consultation call with me if you would like to do so. I'd be more than happy to hear about your specific challenges and tell you a little bit more about how we can help.
That's fantastic. And on the recording page that we send out later today, I'll also include a link to the Small Nonprofit podcast, because Anya did a great episode on that last season that spoke about this as well. So you might even garner some more tips from that also. So yeah, thank you so much, Anya. It's been a great presentation today. Lots to think about here. I want to remind all of our attendees that we are going to follow up with you by email later this afternoon, at least by tomorrow morning, with the webinar recording and the full slide deck. There will be a short survey there as well that will take less than 5 minutes to fill out. We hope that you'll complete that for us if you can. You will have an opportunity there to let us know if there's other topics you'd like to see covered in the future. And we'll also be sure to share all of that feedback with Anya as well. Our next free webinar, as I mentioned, is coming up next week on October 17th, and we're going to be talking about cybersecurity. We have BDO Canada presenting for us next week. So we'll be talking about how to protect your organization and what to do if you do get hacked. There will be a link to register in the email that you receive later today or tomorrow. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you, Anya, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.